same. You know, I had to talk to a lot of different people to figure out, to learn about loneliness from one person and about how hard to push for a settlement from another.
This is the part where we don't quote Anna Karenina, right?
Another thing that was mentioned is the parent trap fantasy, which I agree many kids have. I have asked my grown children, did they have that fantasy? And they said no. And that was because my kids knew when I really meant no, and I would say something like, there is a 0% possibility, you know, whether that you're going to have candy or go to a movie or whatever. And so when I told them that, it was crystal clear to them. And so I think that's something parents can do. As far as without hostility, I think the fact that my kids, I think, came out extremely well was that they had two parents who did put the kids first. I say hate is stronger than love when I see what parents say about the other parent, or they'll reveal, you know, the philandering and all that. And we were able to go on family vacation for 9 years, starting 6 years after our divorce. Nothing in the world was better for my kids. They loved it. So I think the idea of the good divorce, my God, of course, to me. And I'll just say one last thing is that my lawyer, who was Peter Sherman, some of you may know him, he's retired now, but he was so fantastic. And he sent us to a therapist to do the custody. He said, I'm a lawyer. Why should I help you settle the custody? And I think that was a fantastic
And there are now
thing.
some very few law firms now that have on staff parenting coordinators for that, non-lawyer parenting coordinators who do exactly that for that reason.
Yeah. Anyhow, that's my 2 cents,
Okay.
or 10 cents.
Okay. I guess going straight down the line there.
Hi, thank you for this panel. I have a couple of points. First, the idea of collaborative divorce is, you know, I think it probably has some good points to it, as the previous speaker said, but it all depends on there being a certain amount of goodwill between the divorcing parents, and if there isn't, it's really hard to get to that. I understand that the adversarial model sort of positions the parents in opposition to each other, but sometimes that's necessary if they really can't agree. So it sounds like a really great idea, but I think it's not always possible. Second, along with the Parent Trap family, it seems to be, and I don't know exactly what the research is on this, but it seems like the divorced family is being positioned against a perfect intact family. And as we all know, intact families are hardly perfect. And many kids, I don't know what the percentages of kids who come out neurotic from non-divorced families is, but I suspect it's not a whole lot lower than those from divorced families. But my final point is this, and that is that you haven't really addressed any of the structural issues that make it so difficult for divorced couples, specifically, particularly women. We talked a little bit about the economics. Women do certainly, I mean, because women earn 70% of what men do, invariably, unless they're very high-powered, you know, very high-earning people, are going to end up with a lower salary than their husbands. So they can't provide the kids with all the things that the husband might be able to, and so forth and so on. Plus, there's the whole issue of the lack of child care, the lack of paid maternity leave, parental leave, all that stuff that make it so difficult. I mean, because divorced women end up being working mothers. Maybe they were working mothers before, but they end up being working mothers. And I think we really have to take into account all of the policies or non-policies in the U.S. that make being a working mother and a working father, but especially working mother, so difficult.
Sure, I agree with you. That's something we didn't touch on. Unfortunately, these are short panels. A couple of just, I guess, non-scientific or unscientific things I'd like to say about that. First is there are a lot of women in what might fall under the not financially distressed category of family who are themselves quite financially stressed because they don't have access to or control over the marital finances at all. So if you were to look at the family unit from kind of on high, you'd see a very secure financial model. But then if you actually looked within it in the micro level, you'd actually see a woman with basically no power who's being asked to show her grocery receipts to her husband. And then when she comes out of the marriage, sure, she might have a lot less money and she might be working a lot harder, but she may well find herself with a lot more control over her financial life and therefore a lot more financial freedom. That anecdotally I see happen all the time. The second issue is that I think that when that in the adversarial model, it's not just that some people need it because they can't solve everything through collaborative divorce. I think that's a myth. And I actually think that collaborative divorce is something of a fiction, but that's for something I'll yap about another time. There is also, I think, a very strong argument to be made that the adversarial model, when implemented correctly, takes the emotion out of it and allows you to get to a solution more civilly. That's, of course, my opinion on this is somewhat extreme, but I don't really like this opposition that comes up over and over that that it's if you can't solve it yourselves, then you go adversarial. I do also think, particularly for women, separate representation is often much more important than is given credit for. You're taking furious notes, Naomi. I feel like you want to say something.
I just want to, I mean, the economics post-divorce really is really an important issue. I mean, it is still true that, notwithstanding that 40% of women are the primary breadwinners within marriages, men are still 3 times more likely to be the breadwinner than are their wives. So there is a mismatch just within the ongoing marriage. On the other hand, at divorce, it's a lot more efficient for 2 people to live in one household than for 2 people to live in 2 separate households. And so there's often just not enough money to go around. The average American's net worth is $77,000, and the average income is about $46,000 now. It's higher. Men do earn more, but there's still, the economics really are a nightmare when it comes to living in 2 households separately.
Agreed.
I don't agree. In my Splitopia chapter on finances, I see people who often they get remarried. So this is one, and then there's some new research showing that women's standard of living doesn't decline as much as it was thought. That was a mistaken study, from that study was this horrible study that was repeated, showing that women's standard of living declined 74%, and in fact, she'd flipped her numbers, and it was 26%, and that's not even true if you take into account child support, custody, the nice house she may stay in. But what I've seen, again, anecdotally, is people who are in bad marriages and they're weighed down and they're having trouble focusing on their career because 40% of their brain power is going to this fight. So then I see people that get out of those marriages and they're able to focus. And this has happened to me. This has happened to people I've interviewed. So yes, they're working, but they're in control. What you're saying is so interesting to me, that women who were living in a well-to-do family but felt no control, and then I've certainly talked to people like that who came out of it and said, I don't know why I was so poor in my marriage, and now I make less, but I have more. So I do think that the emotional can affect the financial.
I think we have time for one more super quick question, and there's one hand emerging. Oh, there are 2. I don't know. Somebody else decide. I'm horribly indecisive for an adversarial lawyer.
He's persisting.
Okay, he's persistent with the tie.
There's data on that, too.
Guy with the tie here, I guess.
The other one might have had a tie on also, I just couldn't see.
So I'm sort of curious because, I think everyone can sort of point to the illustration where divorce made that individual circumstance better off for the kids, for the people that are involved, as well as individual kind of anecdotal evidence that it made people worse off. I guess I'm kind of interested in what the norms are and then what the policy response should be in terms of that. Is divorce on balance something that makes people better off or worse off? And then indicating, what that norm would be as kind of the general guidance for policy. What policy prescription should it make divorce easier or harder?
Well, my personal pet thing on this, and for all I know, it's in the works already, is I think that, I don't know, that anyone who wants to get married should, when applying for the license, not only have to have a waiting period, but should have to pay into the equivalent of a workers' comp fund, which is like the least controversial broad policy I think that exists in the country. And it should be a dissolution compensation fund that would offset the crippling cost of divorce. I believe that that's because divorce is generally not a good thing and that people shouldn't go into marriage so lightly. That's what I think. In terms of the norms, I'm curious to hear what you guys think. I think people just get married without much thought, and that they get divorced when they feel like it. But that's based on nothing. That's just what I think.
Yeah, I don't know. It would depend on what you're measuring when you say, like, what are the norms for successful outcome, you said?
For children and economically, like if you could take some broad indicators, is divorce on balance better or worse for people in terms of like a generality about it? Because you know, making policy based on exceptions or anecdotes is kind of hard. I'm just trying to understand. Is it a good thing or sort of a bad thing, whatever indices you want to use for that?
Well, that
I'm going to
triggers a
say
whole
again that instability in a family is always going to be bad, is going to be worse for a kid.
Except in high conflict.
Except, right, which is a worse instability, perhaps.
Also,
Yeah.
marriage isn't a set thing. You know, marriage isn't a set thing, so you're not comparing divorce to a particular type of marriage. Marriages are so variable.
And you're also building out of that the preponderance of children who are born into non-marital situations to begin with. Unfortunately, we're out of time, as everyone could probably tell. I could certainly talk all day about this stuff. I want to thank Wendy and Daniel and Naomi for participating. Naomi is doing a doubleheader here, and thank you all very much. And I hope you never need my services. And and I don't know. Thanks again.
Thank you.